We are here in the snow. It is the third time recording this video. The first time the file got corrupted, the second time. We don't talk about the second time, but we're here now. Okay, this video is on sperm. Specifically on sperm donation in Canada. It's time for a bit of a story. A couple weeks ago, I was reading an article, came across one of my feeds, and it said that one person, one donor, had fathered 200 children, and then a whole bunch of people had cancer. Read more into the article. Turns out that in a lot of places around the world, there are very few sperm donors. And in this one particular instance, this one donor had a predisposition to cancer. They had a gene that predisposed them to cancer. And they ended up with 200 children because that's how many of their samples successfully resulted in pregnancies and people being born, etc. And a bunch of them apparently developed cancer, but it was a bit of clickbaity. They were predisposed to cancer. Either way, I went, that's interesting. Let's do a dive on this. I wonder how many sperm donors there are in Canada, what this looks like. I wonder what this process is like, what happens. So I called some companies that do this, and I looked up how many donors there were. On the looking up how many donors there were side, I found out that in 2011, 2013, around there, we had less than 40 total donors in all of Canada, a population of over 40 million. Back then, I think it was close to 38, I believe, but right now it's over 40 million. And the number of donors has only been decreasing over time. The number of apparent treatments that there's demand for this in Canada is 8,000. So let's just think about this for a moment. If there are 40 donors total, and there are 8,000 plus treatments being asked for or needed, that means that if everyone is, having the same number of kids and you divide that, every one of those, 40 donors is having 200 kids. Seems like Canada might have the same problem. So I said, okay, what's involved in this? Why aren't there more people doing this? Well, in Canada, we don't pay for donations. This applies to blood, this applies to sperm, this applies to any bodily fluid, really. In 2004, legislation was passed that made it illegal to charge people or compensate people for fluid donations. It's a little bit of a medical ethics thing. We decided that that was just not a good idea. That's what we weren't going to do. So that was like, maybe. But then, I'm a blood donor and I think about this, and no, people just donate things for free. So it's not that. That's not the reason why this isn't happening. So I go further, and apparently there just hasn't been many public health campaigns on this. There's been a slow decline of people wanting to do this, and there just hasn't been much talking about it. That's pretty much it. And the lack of funding or compensating people for this stuff really exacerbated the problem, but it wasn't the source of it. So I went further. I said, okay, well, what does this process look like? If I wanted to do this, I'm already a blood donor. If I wanted to, start a public health campaign or something or look into solving this problem, what's involved? So I call one of these sperm banks and I talk to them. And it turns out that they shut down their program to take on anonymous donors, and they don't do it anymore. So they refer me to the biggest one in Canada, the one that surely would do this. I call them, and they say, yeah, no, we shut that down, and actually our main supplier, the last one in Canada, in August of 2025, they shut it down entirely, so you just can't donate in Canada at all. And I go, okay, so we have 0 donors? We have zero? We have 0? Yeah, no, we import everything from the United States and Europe. We pay tariffs on this? What? Okay. So I'm looking into this. I'm just like, so wait a minute. If I'm an interested party, say that I'm someone who wants to donate bodily fluid for assisting somebody with something medical, and I'm in Canada, and I don't want to do it for money. I want to do it out of the goodness of my heart and because I feel like I like helping people. There's many people who do this. I just can't. Not because it's illegal, because it's not, it's legal, but just because no one does it. Yeah, pretty much. That is really interesting. So now we still have the challenge where there aren't enough donors, but the Canadian supply is at 0. And I go, well, how can this be? Why would they shut their programs down? Turns out the reason why they shut their programs down is because it costs too much money, and this was run entirely by private industry. So private industry, in order to run this, you've got to have a facility to receive the donations with refrigeration for medical fluid, right? It has to be medical grade. You have to have healthcare staff that are able to do the healthcare practice on this on intake and manage all this, deal with the regulations, etc., because you're dealing with bodily fluids here that are going to be used in reproductive services like IVF, in vitro fertilization. So, you don't want a bad sample, and you don't want things not taken care of, so you have to pay healthcare providers, and you got to do the logistics of transporting back and forth between labs, because just because someone gives a donation doesn't mean that the donation automatically works. They have to test these things. You got to test blood to see if there's bloodborne pathogens before you give it to somebody at the hospital. You got to test sperm to see if there's any sort of genetic concerns, or if it's still good, if there's a high enough count, because the procedure of IVF can be very expensive, and you want to make sure that the donation, the sample that you're using it is a good sample, or the procedure could just fail because it wasn't a high enough count, for example, sperm count in this case. This is really interesting. There's no money in it, apparently. We just don't do it. So now, on one hand, I'm hearing, because I'm looking into this more, there's a bunch of people that are concerned that their kid's going to be born with any sort of genetic concern because they don't have the sort of genetic variety to choose. There's concerns, apparently, that some people have had fathered so many children that people have, unbeknownst to them, married their half-sibling or married, a close relative. Because if you have 8,000 kids, and these people will tend to come from, the parents in this case, will tend to come from similar demographic backgrounds, because you have to have the money to afford IVF. And frankly, certain demographics have to use some form of IVF to produce children. So if you think about women in same-sex, there's no sperm. And if they want to have a kid, they're entirely reliant on donor sperm. So imagine you have a community of people that hang out with other people that are same sex, so lesbians in this case, but really, let's talk about the gay community. So let's say that you are a lesbian couple and you hang out with a bunch of other lesbian couples, and both of you have kids. There is a 1 in 40 chance, best case could be a 1 in 20 chance, that your kids that might grow up as friends have the same father. And you don't even know that, because a lot of this anonymous stuff, you don't necessarily just know that you have the same donor number. This is really, really interesting. The rabbit hole on this just keeps getting deeper and deeper. I love looking up these really interesting niche situations where you have a process failure, because you end up sometimes learning really interesting stuff about this, and then it can apply lessons learned from it in the weirdest ways, to managing a hurricane or dealing with a pandemic or whatever. It's these little niche situations are really, really interesting. Anyways, so you have that one side where people are concerned about this, and then you have the other side where you have to ask, where's the money coming from? So I'm looking at solutions for this, and I'm thinking that, I think there's two main solutions for this. The one solution that you always have to think about when you're looking at any sort of risk, and you're looking at any sort of risk control strategy, would be a recovery solution where you're assuming the loss. Now, assuming the loss, or in this case, not doing nothing but kind of status quo, would be you assume the loss of, you're just not going to have Canadian donors anonymously anymore. One little thing for caveat: you can still donate in Canada if you know the parties involved. So if two people want to have a child, but they require donor sperm, and you walk in with them basically, and you go in as their non-anonymous donor, that is still done in Canada. It's the anonymous system that's not done. So if you don't have a friend that's willing to donate, you can't get from a Canadian source. It's a specific niche thing here. You're not going to have Canadian donors, and you're going to have to assume the loss of not having those people donate to this. They're going to lose out on that freedom of being able to do that. Okay. As far as the genetic diversity is concerned, you'll have less possible donors in the total donor pool, so you'll have increased risk of those genetic challenges, people having an increased risk of unbeknowingly, marrying or dating their siblings, stuff like that. You'll an increase of that, but it'll be lower cost. On the other side, you could kind of prop up this industry. And when I was looking at that, my main thinking was, look, you need the logistics of moving samples, you need healthcare professionals, and you need basically a system to take in samples. Canada already has this with Canadian Blood Services, but frankly, as far as refrigeration is concerned, any public health clinic where you have a freezer that can hold this, You could probably set up a process to facilitate this. You're shipping samples between labs, and a lot of these clinics, doctors' offices already send samples to labs. You could set up a process in a place that already has the infrastructure built. You're not going to have a huge number of these donors they can call in advance. And it's like a one-off thing that one of these clinics or labs might do a couple times a year. Have one, nurse or doctor trained in this type of thing and book an appointment, call in advance so that they know they're doing it. It might not actually be that hard of a thing to do to integrate into a system that already has the infrastructure. So I was just looking at that. Yeah, just really interesting case. Yeah, sperm.